Um, my name is, again, if I didn't mention, is Kirk Wolf. I'm with Dovetail Technologies. With me today is another partner at the firm, Steve Getz. Say hello, Steve.
Hey, guys.
Hopefully you can hear us all well. Let's just get started with this presentation. The first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about us at Dovetail Technologies. We have kind of a unique business model. We develop products that we offer licensed free of charge. Of course, we kind of make money to support this by offering consulting services, and we offer for some products commercial support agreements. So for the Cozy Toolkit, for example, we offer world-class commercial support in the form of a commercial support agreement with standard SLAs and the kind of things that companies want. But you're welcome to use it free if you want. We have several products I'll just mention briefly in reverse chronological order. Several years ago we developed a product called JSOS. I know there's some people on the registration list that are JSOS users, so we thank you for that. We sold that to IBM in 2005. We had made it available free, and IBM makes it available free as part of the ZOS Java SDKs. Something new we did recently this year is we have been kind of publishing information on how to use Tomcat on ZOS, the free Apache Tomcat Java web server, web container. We put together a nice pre-packaged distribution for ZOS of Tomcat, so you can check out our website for that. It's pretty cool. Today we're going to be talking about the Cozy Toolkit and just part of it. The toolkit has a bunch of components. There's some really cool stuff. The Cozy launcher and dataset pipes and this proxy thing. I'm not going to go into that. We just don't have time. But I invite you to look at our website and check those out. We will be talking about today primarily SFTP. We will mention our product in concert with IBM Ported Tools SFTP. They kind of work together. And we'll also mention Cozy Batch because it's a really nice little utility and it's a convenient way to run SFTP batch jobs. So this is kind of like if you go onto YouTube and you want to look at your favorite cat playing the piano video, this is kind of like the commercial that you have to watch before you see that. Just to finish out that theme, I'll throw up a recent print ad that we did. This is sort of in response to a lot of questions that we get. Yeah, we're really serious about this free business. We really believe in it, and it's working out well for us. So I want to thank everyone. I know we have some of our commercial support customers on the conference. I want to thank you all very much, and I also want to thank the free support customers because you're the guys that early on in the development of these products give us tremendous feedback and suggestions on features that you want or helping us work out bugs and things like that. So I want to thank everybody for your support. Okay, that's the end of the commercial. Let's look at the agenda today. This is basically what you saw in the invitation. We're going to talk quite a bit at a high level about SFTP and what it is and how it works with SSH because the two actually go together. You can't use SFTP without SSH. We're going to compare SFTP with FTP and FTPS and talk about the pros and cons of each. On ZOS, there's a offering from IBM which is called IBM Ported Tools for ZOS, OpenSSH. It's got a port of the most popular SSH implementation called OpenSSH. We're going to talk about using that on ZOS, using it as a server, using it as a client. We're going to discuss transferring data sets. We're going to talk about, again, using our free product, Cozy SFTP, in conjunction with Ported Tools to enhance it. We'll talk about connecting with keys and passwords and also this new facility that we have for using using a client certificate. And we'll talk about common problems and pitfalls. So If there are no questions before we get started, we'll just jump right in. I have to, there we go. First, what's SFTP? Despite the fact that it has the three letters FTP in it, it's not FTP at all. It's quite a bit different from FTP in reality. It's not even the same as FTPS, even though they're sort of anagrams of each other. FTPS meaning FTP with SSL or FTP with TLS. SFTP refers to the secure shell specification. This is the Internet Standard SSH2 specification for file transfer. Most SSH implementations include an SFTP command, and this is where SFTP and FTP are kind of alike, because if you look at the SFTP command, the subcommands kind of look a lot like the FTP subcommands. So you might be led to believe that the products are very similar, but that's about all that is the same, is the command syntax from a user's point of view often looks the same. More importantly, though, the wire protocols underneath the covers are completely different. FTP uses a text-based kind of a telnet kind of a command protocol, and SFTP is a very architected packet protocol. So they're very, very different. It's important, I think, to start off the presentation by talking about some terminology just so we can kind of keep it straight. When I use the word SSH, what I mean is the general internet standard defined by this by the group of RFCs that are often referred to as SSH2. SFTP refers to there's a spec under SSH called the SSH file transfer specification. SFT implementations that are out there generally follow this draft spec version 3 or 4. The good news is that the way SFTP is architected, and this goes also for SSH, different implementations, different versions of the spec work very well with each other because there's an exchange of the client and the server exchange what version they are, so that the guy, one side can fall back to the previous guy's version. Works very well. FTPS, when I talk about FTPS, I'll be referring to FTP with SSL, or sometimes that's referred to as FTP with TLS. This is the group of specs, RFC 2228, and all the related specs that kind of get bundled into that. When I talk about ported tools, that'll be my shorthand way of referring to this product from IBM called IBM Ported Tools for ZOS OpenSSH. This is a non-chargeable, and that's IBM's way of saying free. They can't bring themselves to use the word free, so they use non-chargeable. It's a non-chargeable supported feature of ZOS, so you do get support from the IBM Support Center. And here's a note about the previous version of SSH protocol, SSH1. The implementations, a lot of them still allow you to use this, but you want to turn that off if at all possible. And in OpenSSH on ZOS, in ported tools, it's turned off by default because it has some vulnerabilities and weaknesses that you just don't want to get into. Okay, I'm going to move along and talk about SSH a little bit. And we have to do this. We really have to talk about SSH before we get into SFTP because, as you'll see in a minute, you really can't use SFTP without SSH. It really requires it. So let's talk about some of the features that SSH provides. It's a kind of a very nicely architected protocol stack. It provides, let me get a little pointer. It provides first of all, importantly, a secure connection, encrypted connection that uses one TCP/IP socket between a client and a server. The next thing we'll talk about is that the identity of this server is authenticated using a public-private host key pair. Now this has to do with the mechanism by which the server proves who he is, so that the client doesn't talk to a man-in-the-middle attack or something like that. It proves to the client who the server is, that he actually is talking to the correct server. There's also a mechanism in SSH where the client can authenticate over that encrypted connection, and there's several different mechanisms that are in the spec. A public-private key pair, a password, you can use Kerberos. There's all other things like on Unix systems you can use PAM. Different things like that allow the client to authenticate his identity to the server. SSH also provides data compression that you can negotiate between the client and server. And finally, here's the most important thing that it does is it's a substrate on top of which you can run multiple kinds of application channels, different sorts of usages for SSH. So let's talk about those. These are the kind of SSH application channels that are defined in the protocol. The first one is the one that sometimes you don't think about. It's the interactive shell, sometimes referred to as a telnet shell or a secure telnet shell. It's not actually the telnet protocol, it's the SSH protocol. And what you do is, if you use just the SSH command or a PuTTY command, this is what you're using. You're signing into the server and you're getting an interactive TTY terminal that's secured by an SSH shell application channel. The other kind of channel you can have is a remote command execution. So you can use SSH, and on the SSH command you can give the name of a remote command, all the command and the parameters, and it'll remotely start the session, and then in that channel it'll remotely run the command and it'll redirect all of the input and output back to the client from that command. It's kind of cool. This is the SSH version of the old RExec stuff, but the SSH version of this is secure and encrypted and has all those nice attributes. SSH has a cool thing where you can do port forwarding. That is, you can have either the client or the server set up to listen on a port, and then any connections will get tunneled through to the other side and pop out and make a connection. It's kind of cool. Used for all kinds of things. And then finally, there's a channel called a subsystem, and this is important. It's kind of like a command channel, an exec channel, but instead of giving the command name and all the parameters, all you can give it is a logical name. You give it the logical name of what subsystem you want, and then the server is configured to start a program to communicate as that subsystem. So the best example of this is the only one that's predefined. It's the SFTP subsystem is the only one that's sort of standard definition in SSH. And SFTP is a subsystem channel that allows a client to have this secure channel between a client SFTP program and the server SFTP program. But you can define your own user subsystems if you want. Okay, I'm just going to continue on if there's no questions. This is a diagram that kind of shows how this works in a typical SFTP implementation. For example, in OpenSSH, the common implementation that's out there, what you'll have is separate commands, really. The SFTP command, when you use it, it actually starts as a child process an SSH command. And this SSH command that it starts, it actually makes a connection to SSHD, which is the server, over a secure connection and does all the authentication and all the stuff we talked about. This -S says that he wants the SFTP subsystem. SSHD sees that and starts the SFTP server process as a child process. So logically what's happening is you're getting a logical secure channel between the SFTP client and the SFTP server, but it's really using all of this substrate provided by SSH. Now, the only other point I want to make is that when SSHD authenticates the user and starts this subsystem, this SFTP server subsystem is started under the user's credentials. So it's started under the user ID that's logged in. It as a normal job. It doesn't have any special privileges. It's just a normal program run under the security context of the user who signed in. The implications of this are pretty important, and I want to reiterate because it's kind of important to understand how these things fit together. The SFTP command and SFTP server subsystem are not responsible for all the stuff that SSH provides. They don't do socket communication. They don't do passwords and key exchange and all that. Encryption, compression, all those things are provided by SSH. So it's kind of nice. The SFTP subsystem and SFTP client commands just have to worry about doing file copies in a sense, sending commands to one another to have this sort of client-server relationship to be able to send files and data sets and stuff back and forth. Okay, that's sort of a high-level overview of some of the pieces and parts and what they do. What we're going to do now is I'll introduce to you and discuss some of the popular SSH and SFTP implementations. They usually come together when you have an SSH product. It'll also include SFTP. The big kahuna, the overwhelming market share in this is held by this free open source product called OpenSSH. And the reason for that is that OpenSSH is built into all of the Unix and Linux distributions. So all your open systems that you'll have out there, those distributions will have OpenSSH configured and running by default. And in fact, all of the modern Unix Linux distributions don't even start a regular telnet server by default. That's because everybody realizes that telnet is very insecure, so that when you connect a terminal up to a Unix or Linux distribution, typically these days you're always using SSH and one of these shell connections. IBM Ported Tools is a port of OpenSSH for ZOS, both SSH and SFTP. And Cozy SFTP is a port of just the SFTP and SFTP server stuff. If you use our free product, it requires that you use IBM Ported Tools to provide the SSH layer. On Windows, there's a very popular client. You guys probably might use it. It's called PuTTY. PuTTY, by the way, allows you to do not only SSH terminal sessions, but also regular telnet terminal sessions. But the PuTTY suite also includes an implementation of PuTTY SFTP. It's called PSFTP. You can use that. And I also mentioned that WinSCP is a really nice graphical Windows client that uses SFTP, and it uses the PuTTY code underneath, but it's a kind of a nice drag-and-drop interface for doing graphical SFTP from Windows. Another popular implementation is a commercial implementation from SSH Communications called SSH Tectia. This runs not only on Windows and Unix and Linux and things, but it also runs on ZOS. So there are actually two SSH implementations on ZOS, Tectia and OpenSSH. Another I'll mention is from Van Dyke. They have some popular products that run. They're more popular on Windows. They're server products on Windows. I'll mention you can also run OpenSSH on Windows, but they have commercial versions for Windows that some people use. And there's a lot of other ones. If you use a routers or switches or something, a lot of times they'll include embedded SSH implementations inside. The other point I'll make is that the really nice thing about the architecture of SSH and the nice specification is that these implementations you'll find are very compatible. You just don't run into a lot of incompatibility problems with SSH and SFTP. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is some of the differences between SFTP and FTPS. This is going to hopefully contrast some of the pros and cons and differences between how they work that are worth consideration. The first is, and we mentioned host authentication. This is where the mechanism by where the host proves who he is. In FTPS, that is FTP with SSL, that's done by a server certificate, just like you would have a server certificate on your HTTPS servers. FTP uses a server certificate to prove who he is. In SSH, the SSHD server proves who he is by using public-private key pairs, either RSA key pairs or DSA key pairs. And I'll show you how that works, but basically the server generates, when you install it, you generate some key pairs, and then when you connect to it from a client, you authenticate that you're talking to the right server by proving that he's the right server using his public key. So you have to actually connect once and sort of accept his public key, and then from then on that public key will be used in the client as a local validation of who the server is. And we'll show you how that works a little bit. User authentication in FTPS, you can use passwords, which is very common, or you can actually use a client certificate. That is a certificate held by the client with a private key that authenticates who the client is. And you can also use Kerberos in a lot of implementations. In SSH, you can use passwords, or you can use key pairs that are user key pairs to authenticate the user. You can also use, in some implementations, you can use Kerberos and PAM and things like that. The IBM Ported Tools implementation on ZOS just supports passwords and DSA RSA key pairs. Some more differences, and this is kind of an important one that we'll discuss for a minute, is the differences between SFTP and FTPS in terms of how they use socket communications. As many of you probably know, FTP and FTPS have this strange traditional way of working where there's a control connection made on port 21. That's for FTP. FTPS uses typically a different port. But there's this one control connection, and the commands go back and forth through there. But when you do a command that involves a transfer or a listing or something like that, it dynamically opens another socket on another port, a dynamically sort of allocated port. And that connection can be set up, it used to be by default, it was from the server back to the client, which is kind of unusual, or most people use this passive mode, which actually the server tells the client what port to use on the command control connection, and then the client opens a second connection on that port from the client. This might have seemed like a good idea, back when the internet was a baby, when that FTP was designed. But this has a lot of problems and can be troublesome for firewalls and NAT routers, as you can imagine. And it's even compounded worse with FTPS because the control connection is typically encrypted. With SSH, there's just one socket. We mentioned this before. All of the application channels that you might want to run are multiplexed into a single encrypted socket connection, which is much more firewall or router friendly. Okay, Steve's reminding me that I need to pick it up a little bit. Some other differences between SFTP and FTPS is that with regards to dataset support, FTPS, as you would expect, has very good dataset support. It also includes exotic things like sending an entire load module library. If you look at Ported Tools from IBM, SFTP, it includes no dataset support. You can only transfer HFS or ZFS files. It doesn't support datasets at all, which is, as you can imagine, one of the primary reasons why we wrote Cozy, which is to add that dataset support. SSH TechDia is a strong offering. It has pretty good dataset support. It kind of relies on it works best, I'll say, when the other side, the other partner, is TechDia. They use some extensions some non-standard extensions to the protocol to make it work. And if your partner is not TechDia, then there are some limitations. SMF accounting is real important these days in terms of auditing. And FTP, of course, has these records it writes. The newest form is SMF 119 records. SFTP doesn't do that at all with Ported Tools. In Cozy or TechDia, both of those products write compatible records with FTP, SMF type 119 records. In terms of hardware exploitation, using crypto hardware, as you would expect, FTPS is very good. It does all the kinds of things you would want. And Tectia does as well. I'll mention some of the things with ported tools. Random number entropy. This is actually generating a secure random number. This can be done with ported tools if you set up ICSF and make sure that your dev random device is working. There's instructions in the manual, IBM's manual, on how to do this. This is really important. It'll speed up your connections a lot. The fallback mechanism is very slow. In Cozy SFTP, we have something really new that we're going to show you in a little bit later. It has to do with actually using a SAF RACF certificate to sign client SSH requests as an alternative to using passwords. It's pretty cool. One of the things that ported tools doesn't do as well as I would hope is it doesn't support hardware exploitation of the block ciphers. That's done in software, so I have a little note here. It'd be great if we could get IBM to. They have a requirement on this, but it'd be great if some people could. We could convince them that this should be added. Finally, the last difference that I'm going to talk about is user exits. IBM's FTP product defines some user exits that can be used either to pre-validate all of the commands or to post-process file transfers. And these are used by customers and managed FTP products from vendors to do this management and control, this fine-grained control over your FTP environment. This is one of those things that was a user request that we got, and we added this into Cozy SFTP so that we actually call IBM compatible FTP exits. So if you have exits that work with IBM FTP, it's real easy to hook those up to SFTP and get the same kind of control. While I'm talking about that, I'll mention that we worked with a software vendor who has a managed FTP product that uses these facilities. It's softwareassist.net. They have a product called FTP Watchdog. This is a managed FTP product that not only manages FTP, but it also manages now Cozy SFTP using these SMF records and the user exits. It allows you to have nice, fine-grained preemptive control over what users can do on the server using your own installation-defined SAF RACF rules. You can do monitoring, automation and alerts, and finally, really simplified auditing of your usage of FTP and SFTP. So a lot of times we get these discussions about, well, what should I use? Should I use SFTP or FTPS? What's best? Here are some pros and cons that I'll briefly discuss. As you can imagine, I think that everyone would agree that FTPS, IBM's FTP, generally has better native ZOS facilities. It's just got great integration with ZOS. But SFTP from Cozy or even Tectia has pretty good data set support. We think Cozy has excellent data set support, and we have done some nice things like FTP compatible exits in Cozy to make it work in your environment, in your ZOS environment. FTPS, I'll mention, likes to use certificates. So if you're in an environment where you really like X509, PKI, FTPS that's the mechanism it uses for doing all these keys and certificates. SSH Tectia is quite interesting. They have a non-standard extension. It's not part of the SSH standard, but they'll allow you to use X509 certificates to authenticate sessions, which is kind of cool, I think. In Cozy SFTP, we do something that we think is very unique. We allow you to use a certificate in SAF RACF, but we don't exchange it as a certificate over the wire. We actually use the system SSL APIs and to use that certificate to sign the SSH request so that across the wire it looks like an SSH request, but we can use a SAF RACF certificate to do that. And of course, with those APIs, the certificate and the private key remain locked up in SAF RACF or even your hardware tokens. We don't actually get to access to them. We can just use the APIs to make signatures from them. On the SFTP side of the equation, SFTP, because of this single connection, single socket mechanism is much more firewall and router friendly. Also, this is what a lot of people are determining and finding out these days, is that in Unix and Linux environments, because SFTP and OpenSSH are pre-installed, that it's more widely deployed. If you're talking to partners who are using Unix or Linux, they're going to ask you, well, please use SFTP as their preference. Finally, SFTP has generally fewer incompatibilities between implementations. The implementations are generally very, very compatible. You just don't find problems. So I'll mention, though, if you look at these pros and cons, that it's sort of a moot point in many cases, and oftentimes you're going to be using both. You're going to be finding that your partners dictate what they want to use, and that you'll have to, in many cases, be using both SFTP and FTPS depending on the partner. Okay, I'm going to try to move it along. Here's some information. I'm going to mention to you that we're going to provide these foils and a recording of this presentation on our website in the next couple of days. So if I skip over some stuff, it'll be available later, but I'm going to try to get through this so that we have time for some questions. This is information about setting up OpenSSH. The manual is very good. The only thing I'm going to point out is that you want to, if at all possible, configure ICSF if you have it, to use dev random for your entropy. It makes it work a lot better. This is a little quiz question. It has to do with how SSHD finds which subsystem, which program to run for SFTP. There's a configuration line in SSHD config that points the SFTP subsystem to the binary. So by default, you'll see it like this line. I have it commented out. This is the IBM ported tools binary for SFTP server. I've commented that out, pointed it to this front end that we have, which based on user profiles will either run IBM's version or our version, Cozy SFTP. This is how you change the configuration in ported tools to point to either one. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, there's a couple of foils that show some demonstrations. I'm just going to do a live little demo and show you a couple of things on using the server. This is a Windows command shell, and I have the PuTTY SFTP installed. So there's a command line called psftp. I'm going to connect into this our ZOS system using a user ID. Now, here's what I wanted to show you this. This is what you see if this is the first time you connected. This is telling you that this is the fingerprint, the public key for that server, that host. And it's asking you, is this the guy you want to talk to? Now, once I accept this, if I say yes, it'll store it locally, and I won't have to make that again. I'll have a local copy of that public key so that I can authenticate it automatically without user interaction next time. I enter my password, and now I have a connection, and if I just do an LS, a directory listing, it'll list my default home directory here, and I have a couple of files in there. I can do normal kinds of things. I'm gonna get a file. There's a file that everybody's probably familiar with called Etsy profile, and I'll just grab it like that, and I've downloaded the file. So you have all the standard commands. There's help. These kind of look like FTP commands, as I mentioned, but they're really SFTP commands in the PuTTY version of SFTP. One thing I'll show you that's really cool is that I'm not actually connected to the ported tools SFTP server. I'm connected to our Cozy SFTP server, so some things I can do that I normally can't do in ported tools. One thing is I can change directories to a dataset level. So I'm going to pick this high-level qualifier, 2-level qualifier. When I do a CD there and I do an LS, what I'm doing now is I'm getting a listing of these datasets. And what you'll see is a nice, friendly sort of ZOS 3.4 kind of listing of the data sets that are available. So I have two data sets there. One's a load library and one's a PDS. I can even change directory. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I can even change directory into underneath there into a PDS. So I'll change directory into SAMP-JCL. Now my current directory is actually this PDS, and when I do an LS, it gives you kind of what you would expect, which is a directory member listing of this. Now, this PDS doesn't have ISPS statistics on, but if they were, you would be able to see those as well. Just gives you a member list. So let's try to do a transfer. I'm just going to do a transfer of one of these members, run SFTP, and it downloaded that PDS member. Now I can just, the bang character lets me do a Windows command. I'm just going to do a more on that, run SFTP. And I can see that this is the data set. Now what you might notice is that if you're used to using ported tools, SFTP, the server, it's a binary only transfer. In COSI we allow you to have all kinds of settings that allow you to control things like whether you're in text mode and things like that. So let me show you that. The way this works is there's a special magic directory called /+, and if I list that, I can see what my current settings are. Now, the default is mode binary, and we maintain that as the default in our product too, but I actually have a profile that turns my mode to text, because that's most commonly what I'm using. I want mode text as my default, so I have a profile that sets that up. And once you turn mode text on, you get some other defaults, like which code pages it uses to translate between the server and the client. So that's why when I downloaded that data set, I actually got text, ASCII text on my PC. So that's kind of nice. The next thing I'll show you is, let me change up to the data set level, IBMuser.cozy. What I'll do is, let me take this, I have a bunch of files in my local directory. Let's take t.text. This is just a small little text file that I have. And I'm going to load it up and put it into a test.data. So it actually, since my current directory was IBMuser.cozy, it puts it in this data set, IBMuser.cozy.test.data. If I do an ls now, I can see that I have 3 data sets. And if I notice, the record format and LRECO of this are U and 0. They're kind of like the defaults. Well, there's a setting for that. You know, it's kind of like there's an app for that. I can say /+ recfm equals FB, and I can put multiple settings on the command line here. LRECL equals 80. I can do that. And now I have those settings. So if I look in do an ls of my /+ directory, I can see that I have more settings there now. I can also say I wanted to have like, you know, allocate cylinders with a primary of 1, 1, something like that. I can have all kinds of settings. In fact, there's a special setting called help. If you use that, it'll print out all the possible settings. There's all kinds of dynamic allocation settings that you can use. Basically, any kind of dynamic allocation setting that you can imagine you can use. As well as things like that control what your line-in characters is, whether or not spaces are truncated at the end of lines, all kinds of stuff like that. I'll let you look in our user guide at all that stuff. We don't have time to go through it all now, but let me remove that data set. I'll just delete it. And then I'm going to put that text file up there again. And when I do an ls now, I can see that, sure enough, I get FB80 with 15 tracks and 1 extent so far, 1 cylinder. Okay? So that's what I'm going to show here in terms of connecting a client into ZOS FTP using COSI SFTP. That was this. The next thing that I want to discuss is using the client under ZOS. What I just showed you was using the SFTP server on ZOS from another client. This is an example of using the SFTP client in a batch job. Now, the first thing I'll show you here is that this is how you would use ported tools SFTP without COSI, just by way of contrast. So you could have here, you could run your, this dearth of a utility called BPX batch, and you could give it the name of a shell script to run, and in that shell script you could put your SFTP commands. This less than EOB says that the subcommands follow in line, and then I can give it a file that I want to copy. So a couple of points about this. First point is, in a batch job, the SFTP clients and the SSH clients, for that matter, don't allow you to sort of put your password in line. They'll only prompt for a password to a real terminal. So if you have a real terminal connected, it'll prompt for a password, but running it in a batch job without a terminal, it won't sort of read the password in line. That's sort of their, their view of a more secure system. There is a way to do that. I'll show you in a minute. But in order to use this like this, you would have to set up public-private key pairs to make this work, because you would not be able to prompt for a password. The other thing I'll mention about this is, with ported tools, you can only transfer HFS files. So if you're using the base mechanisms, you would need to have an extra step to copy the HFS files to or from the ZOS datasets. I'm going to contrast with how you would use COSI SFTP client in a batch job. And there's a couple things going on here. One is that instead of BPX batch, we're using this utility called COSI batch. Now, it really has nothing to do with SFTP. What it is, it's just a replacement for BPX batch that allows you to do some nice things. And one of the main things you can do is you can put your shell commands right in line, standard in DD star, and just put whatever you want to run under your Unix shell in line. The other thing you can do is that you can pass in variables. You can say set this shell variable RF to be equal to &R file, meaning the proc variable R file or this JCL set variable R file will be plugged into that RF Unix shell variable. So you can use this to pass in data from JCL into this shell. Inside the shell script, I've set a variable to some options. This option will allow us to automatically accept the host key if we don't have one already. So if this is the first time connecting, it'll automatically accept that host key. If we've already got one and it's different, that's going to fail. But this is kind of makes it easier connecting the first time. And then with those options, we're going to connect to RU at RH. These are the variables passed in. And then we're going to download the file RF from the remote server. But now with COSI SFTP, this is a different command. It's not SFTP with ported tools. It's our command. You can download right to a data set. So you can have a data set here. You can also use regular data set names, but you can download to a DD reference here so that we have in this job step. Again, this batch job still has no way of prompting for a password, so it assumes that you have public keys set up between the client and the server. That's one way. I'll show you another way in the next foil. Adding to that previous example, SSH has a mechanism, and you can use this with ported tools also. You can have this special variable called SSH AskPass, this environment variable, and what you do with that is you point it to a program or an executable. In this case, it's a shell script that we've written. And this shell script, what it does is it looks at this variable and reads this data set and prints out the password. So if you set this variable, the IBM SSH client will read that and use this program to get the password for him. There's a couple of things you got to do. You got to set. It's very strange, but you got to set this to make this work, and you got to turn this switch on. There's a bunch of sort of magic incantations.
But once you do all this, you can download and have the password stored in this data set. Now, this password, I guess, a good idea would be to protect this with RACF or SAF so that no one could use this password data set. No one could read it except perhaps even this job.
There's also specific requirements on the format of that password in that member.
Right. It has to have no leading spaces, and you can't have line numbers and things like that. Thanks for reminding me, Steve. Now, these examples that we're showing you of Cozy JCL, these are all shipped with our product as sample JCL, so you don't have to write this down. You'll get these samples in the product. Let me go to another example. We're getting tight on time. Here's an example just like the previous one, only here's the difference. This is something that we recently added this summer, and that is I can give the name of the users, the user being the user that's running, the user ID of this batch job, the user's SAF keyring. So this is the name of a SAF keyring that has the user's client certificate in it, the default certificate in that ring. And if you do this, Cozy SFTP does a really cool thing. It sets itself up as an SSH key agent, and it uses the system SSL APIs to use that certificate. In fact, it uses its key to sign the SSH request. So we don't have, through those APIs, we don't actually take the private key out. We can't actually get the private key from the key ring. Only administrator can do that. But the user can use the key in the key ring to sign the SSH request. Now, across the wire, it looks like a regular SSH key authentication. So we have a command where you can take a key ring and you can export the public key in SSH format. And that's what you put on the remote side. So once you get this set up, it's pretty cool. It's actually better than a password because you have credentials that are stored in RACF, and in fact they could be stored in a hardware token if you wanted, and that would use that authentication with no password to sign in the remote system using standard SSH key protocols. These next foils go through sort of step-by-step how to set up a normal SSH public-private key pair. I'm going to skip over that because the foils be made available to you. This is pretty cut and dry. It walks you right through it. But I want to make sure we have some time at the end. Let's discuss some of the common pitfalls. One of the things you have to know is that the ported tools uses Unix system services heavily, and that if you use a ZOS client, SFTP client, or you log in as a server, the user ID that you're using must have a OMBS segment. Here's kind of a gotcha. This causes a lot of trouble. Now, first of all, I'll say that you shouldn't do this, but people do. It's really not a good idea to share UIDs with different ZOS user IDs. But some people actually do this. They have their systems programmers share UID 0, which is, in my opinion, a bad practice, but it's done. If you do this, IBM Ported Tools, it doesn't really look up your home directories by your user ID. It looks it up by the UID number. So it'll actually get one of the user IDs sort of randomly, and so you'll actually be looking at the wrong SSH configuration directories for your keys if you're using keys. That is regular SSH keys. If you're using key files, they must be in EBCDIC on ZOS. This is sometimes a problem if you're transferring a public key from another system. You've got to make sure you transfer in text. I've mentioned this before, but if you have ICSF hardware, it's really a good idea to configure that. It's laid out how to do it in the Ported Tools documentation, how to use dev random. It makes session setup a lot quicker. The fallback is called the SSH RAND helper, and it's kind of a steaming mess. It's very slow and not all that secure, so I would recommend going this route if you can. If you're setting up keys, you got to watch out that the directories have the right permissions on them. Otherwise, it won't use your keys. It doesn't want to use keys that are sort of unprotected in directories. One of the things I'll mention, if you store private keys in the file system, you want to make sure, I think it's a good idea to use ACLs to protect those with your security product so that no one can use them. Troubleshooting. If you're debugging a batch job, this is a good idea. We find this helps a lot. Sometimes you can get connection problems or authentication problems. If you log in with an interactive shell, an SSH shell, log into ZOS, use the command interactively, the SFTP command interactively, or the cozy SFTP command interactively. It's a lot easier to debug what's going on sometimes in interactive mode rather than in a batch job. Even under a batch job, though, you can use this switch-VVV in the client, and it will print out, a somewhat incomprehensible trace of what's going on with SSH and SFTP. If you have one that works, you can compare it against that, and sometimes it'll give you a hint as what's going wrong. With Cozy SFTP server, we have a per session log file that's configured. You can override an installation basis where this goes. By default, it goes in the TMP directory. And then you can also, with Cozy SFTP server, you can have a user profile in the users.ssh directory that configures tracing levels. If you report a problem to us, sometimes we'll ask you to go into that and turn a trace level on so that we can get a trace. We have information in our user's guide on how to set up an SSHD server, a test one on a different port. Sometimes that's convenient for testing problems because you can kind of see at a low level what's going on with SSHD without trying to find the syslogd logs. The IBM manual on ported tools is actually very good. It's got a troubleshooting section that if you're troubleshooting connections with SSH with ported tools, it has a lot of good information on fixing those kinds of common problems. And finally, I want to mention that we have a free support forum here. There's information on signing up on our support page. There's actually a little code that you have to use to sign up. And I apologize for this all the time, but we do this to kind of keep these evil spammers from, putting porn spam and nasty stuff in our forum. So apparently these guys are really stupid and they don't look around. So if you just look on our page and we say, here's the code, and you type that code in if you want to create your own user ID to be able to post questions to the forum. It's real easy to do, and we're very conscious about using that forum. We don't use it for a lot of advertising and contacts. We don't want to bother people that way. So it's just a mechanism for us to be able to keep spammers out of our forum. Okay, here's some legal information on trademarks. I want to show you, if we have a minute, on our website, if you go to the solutions page and click on one of the components in the toolkit like SFTP, you'll get some information high level on a Cozy SFTP product. And then from here there's links. There's a link to go download the toolkit. There's a link to the forum support information. And we have a link right online to the user's guide. So the user's guide is available in HTML form online. You can also download a PDF right here. But there's some information here, for instance, on customizing ported tools to point that subsystem to our front end. I guess that's about all. Steve, you have some other things you want to cover?
Just show the download page real quick so it's easy to see what that looks like.
Okay. Here's the download page. This is the toolkit for ZOS. It includes all these components. There's a .ben file. It's a self-extracting installer. if you look in the Cozy Launcher User's Guide, it talks about how to install it. It's really simple. There's some other components here that run on other systems, and these have to do not with SFTP, but with using the Cozy Launcher. So these target system toolkits, a common question that we get is, well, do I need this toolkit for my Solaris system or my AIX system or my power system to run SFTP? And the answer is no. You just run the normal compatible SFTP product on those systems. This has to do with a tool that we have on those systems that supports Cozy Launcher, which is a different technology. We're running up against the hour. We have scheduled this to run over to cover questions. I certainly know that I have not answered all your questions. So if anyone has a question, we either take it online now or open your mic. If you don't, or you're thinking of a question, I'll go ahead and demonstrate one other thing. Steve, you want me to show the WinSCP?
Sure. Yeah, actually there was a question earlier in the presentation about whether or not we work with WinSCP, so this will be good.
Okay. Yeah, there's a really nice graphical interface for SFTP called WinSCP. It uses the PuTTY code. It's free open source. You can save profiles for your different connections. I don't have my password saved, so I'll type it in. And when you use this, it uses SFTP, and we have our ZOS server set up to use Cozy SFTP. So this is actually a connection. It logs me in, and by default shows me my home directory on that system. Now, a really cool thing you can do is you can open up other directories. Like if I open up this magic settings directory, the /+ directory, here I am in /+, I can see all of the settings. They kind of look like files, as you saw before. And if I want to change a setting, I can change it just by renaming the setting if I want, or I can rename any setting that I want. I can say mode equals binary if I want. And now when I say mode equals binary, all those other options that apply only to text go away.
Hey, Kirk, I'm going to interrupt for a second.
Yes.
Someone asked a question. I think it's probably of value for the entire audience. Question is, can we view the webinar later?
Yes. We are recording this, and assuming the recording doesn't get trashed somehow, we plan on putting that recording and the foils just standalone up on our website. I'm not sure that we're going to get it out there today, but in the next day or two we'll put that up, and it'll be a link from our website to look at the recording. So this is back to WinSCP. These are the settings. You can change any setting. If you want a new setting, I could just rename this .new option and rename it to whatever setting I want, and that sort of sets the setting. So you're not actually dealing with real files. These are sort of pseudo, they're pretend files that are really settings. You can also open up a ZOS directory. I'll just point to this IBMuser.cozy level, this data set level, and you can see underneath that there's two data sets, actually three data sets. Test data is a data set that shows up as a file. Now, Load Live and SAMP.jcl show up as folders because they're PDSs. So if I double-click on that, I can see now I'm in the SAMP.jcl folder. I can see all the members of the PDS. I can even do this. Like I can say, I'll open this. I'll double-click on this, and it'll open a nice little editor on that PDS member. This is a sample job that we submit that shows how to create RACF SAP certificates. And if I want to change something, I can just make changes here. And then if I just say save, it actually uploads that back using SFTP. It's kind of cool. Unless there are any other questions. Steve?
So, looks like we have one question outstanding. Let's see what it is. How would you set up Windows to be the server and ZOS to be the client?
Right. If you wanted to set up Windows to be a server, you would need to get a SSHD an SSH server on Windows. Now there's several options. You can get the free OpenSSH server for Windows. There's a port of that works for Windows under the Unix emulation environment for Windows called Cygwin. We have some instructions on setting up Cygwin on Windows that's related to our other product, Cozy Launcher, that talks you through setting up Windows, the free OpenSSH server on Windows. But there are also commercial servers available for Windows. PuTTY is not a server, but you could use Van Dyke's has a nice Windows server, or SSH Tectia has a nice Windows server. And you could use that Windows server and set up an SSH server on Windows. Once you've done that, you would use ZOS's SFTP client. You could have a batch job, just like we demonstrated. Here's a batch JCL for running Cozy. This is a little more involved one where we allow you to customize all kinds of things. This sample JCL runs Cozy in a batch job, and you would just in here put in the remote user ID and the remote server, either the IP address or the host name of your Windows server that you wanted to connect to. So I hope that answered your question. You can follow back with a follow-up if I missed something. I want to, as people are falling off, as we're winding this up, I want to thank everyone for your attendance. If there are any questions outstanding that we didn't get to, we'll follow those up with emails. Or if you have questions, you can either use the support forum, the free one, or you can, if they're sort of confidential in nature, you can send us an email at info@dovetail.com. And again, I want to thank everyone, especially our existing customers, our commercial support customers, and our free users that help us out to make these better products. So, if that's it, I guess we're going to be wrapping this up. Thank everyone for your participation. I know it's a whole hour or a little more is a lot of time out of your day, and we appreciate it. So if again, follow up with questions if you have them. Otherwise, we're going to sign off and end this presentation.